Welcome to CityWorks, a production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Each month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. On today's episode, Organized Labor and Election 2024. Unions and their members are in high gear these final weeks before November, mobilizing to elect pro-worker allies from judges and members of the Assembly to the President of the United States. We've invited leaders and political directors from organized labor to help us get a better sense of just what this election cycle means for working people, their families, and where they live, and what it means to organize for labor. Candis Tall is Vice President and Political Director of 32BJ, SEIU, representing more than 175,000 property service workers, including security officers, cleaners, and public school workers in 12 states and Washington, D.C. Hae-Lin Choi is Political Director of the Communications Workers of America District 1, representing 145,000 workers in 200 CWA local unions in New York, New Jersey, New England, and Eastern Canada. Lucia Gomez is Political Director of the New York City Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO, representing 300 New York City unions and 1.3 million members. Candis Tall, Hae-Lin Choi, Lucia Gomez, welcome to CityWorks. I am so glad to have you, and I appreciate you taking time out in these very busy last weeks before the election of November. I think we should start with you three as people. Like, how are you doing? Let's start with you, Lucia. How are you actually doing? How are you feeling in this moment? Where are you physically? Do you feel like, I don't know, feeling hopeful, feeling good?
I'm feeling ready.
I'm
ready. I think as a political director, you plan out your entire life based on an election calendar. And so this is another year with another election cycle, a couple of weeks before E-Day, and then plans immediately following that, and then re-gearing up for 2025. So, feel ready.
All right, ready? Hae-Lin, how about you?
I feel fabulous, to be honest.
You seem fabulous. Look at you.
Thank you. I am so excited, and I think it's coming from the energy of our members who just feel so energized and excited and really committed and ready. And it's really infectious. And so, as they say, it's more fun to have fun. And elections are always tough, right? And it's real, and we feel very serious about it. But at the same time, I'm fabulous because I feel like the excitement is real, and it really will help us coast to victory in November.
Candis?
I'm excited. I think, for a long time, I felt like obligated, right? We have to do this, right? Working people don't have another option. We have to win this. We have to win for, we have to win wages. We have to win, better benefits. We have to win all these things. And so we feel like we have to do it, but now I'm excited to do it, right? I think that, this moment means so much to me, especially as a Black woman, right? This could be our chance to have a Black woman in the Oval Office. So I'm like excited. Let's get this done, right? And not just out of an obligation, but also, I think Hae-Lin just said it, like joy, right? I think in this moment, we're seeing joy back in politics, people laughing again, people smiling again. I feel excited about walking, doors and, calling people with some energy and excitement. So I feel good.
Now, I just alluded to who you will represent, but just to remind people, give us a picture. Like, who's part of 32BJ?
We represent building service workers. So we represent doormen, superintendents of buildings, porters. We represent, commercial office cleaners, window washers. We represent security officers, schools cleaners, airport workers. If they're a service worker in a building, they're a member of 32BJ.
And the AFL Central Labor Council, that's a huge group of people.
I mean, it represents a plethora of all the unions, right? Including 32BJ, including CWA. I mean, the diversity scales from entertainment, music, right, to warehouse workers and Starbucks workers. I mean, you run the gamut between private sector, building trades, right? All the construction workers that are out here in the heat, and then everyone, cable lines. So you name it in terms of service work or any work in the city of New York, and they're part of the movement, which is the organized, unionized labor movement.
Now, people think they know who communication workers are, but they don't necessarily. Who are your members?
We like to say anybody who communicates is a CWA member. But the main industries that we represent are telecommunications, public sector, and healthcare. But we also have members who work in the nonprofit sector, airline industry, in the news industry, universities, higher education. But the main industries are telecom, healthcare, and public sector.
All right, so New York is a capital of telecom communications and media. New York is, we're talking the city now, is a fairly unique kind of place when it comes to elections, particularly federal ones. How are you all engaged? Because some people might say, well, you don't need to work too hard in New York City.
Well, we need to be working hard every time there's an election to engage our members, to make sure that they turn out to vote so that they understand the impact that they can have by ensuring large turnouts, by ensuring that they connect with their other members, peers, and then across the country. We need to be able to, we have the opportunity, the density in New York City, to assist in other states and in other localities to ensure that congressional districts across the state of New York are able to elect great candidate or great elected officials that will actually represent the needs of working people. And, that is a huge, opportunity that members in New York City have to assist Pennsylvania. That's not too far, across. And so, I think New York City has a unique opportunity to be able to show their volunteerism, show their civic engagement, and help win, across the country.
Now, there are new initiatives that you've all been part of, which are unique this year. Do you want to talk about Battleground, your Battleground work, your Battleground campaign?
Yeah, happy to. So both CWA and 32BJ are part of this big effort called Battleground New York. Because basically, look, we looked after the big losses in the midterms, and we realized that I think it's pretty clear New York and California lost the House. And so we realized it's our obligation to take back the House. There's no path to winning back the House without New York. So we sprang into action basically in February 2023. We tried to learn from how we lost in 2022 and realized there was not a big field operation. It was too late. So we realized voters don't like it if you knock on their door a few days before the election and say, hey, there's something really important going on here. We need you to vote for this person.
I mean, just to take people back to those midterms, the last big federal elections, there was this sense of, apathy maybe in New York or California, the assumption that these are kind of democratic states. And sure enough, the House flipped because of seats that were lost in those two states.
People who stayed home.
People
right?
that stayed home.
Right.
People that didn't show up. I want to hear more about the Battleground campaign, but I want to come back to you, Candis, with this moment that we're in. That apathy, if we had been having this conversation 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, what would you have been saying?
A month ago.
I would have said we have to do it and we have to win because our members' lives are at stake.
Right.
Right. This is not just we don't vote because one candidate we like better. Right. What happens and the decisions that are made really impact our members. They are the most impacted by decisions around racial justice, immigrant justice, economic justice, climate justice. Our members feel that first. They don't have an option to, opt out and not be a part of the conversation. All of the policies that, these folks that are elected from the White House down, that they, put in place impact our members first and the most, right? Our members are majority Black and Latino and immigrant. They are impacted by everything that government does. And so we don't have a choice to stay home. So we would have gotten up and gone out anyway, but now we're just a little happy to do it.
You would have got your muster up for Joe Biden?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Uncle Joe ain't do nothing to nobody, right? He's been so good, particularly on labor, right? When you think about, probably one of the most pro-labor presidents of my time, absolutely, right? So he has done what he was supposed to do for us. And so we were ready to do what we had to do for him. I think this moment, though, has gotten other people excited and breathed new life into the campaign, right? Because people are like, oh, this is different.
I was going to say
And
there's ready and then there's radiant in the way that you all
Yeah.
are now. I mean, something did change with the candidate, with all due respect.
Yeah.
Candidates aren't the be all and end all, but this one, that flip from Biden to Harris
that
made a difference.
changed everything. I mean, it just changed the way in which we can set up the calls and the volunteers that are now like saying, hey, what can I do? And being proactive. And it felt like 2020, believe it or not, where everyone was calling me saying, I want to get hooked up on a phone bank. You know, I want to go to Pennsylvania. Even in the middle of the pandemic, we had people driving and masking up and learning how to take a couple of steps back from that door. So it wasn't holding folks back. I feel that now. You know, before I knew what needed to happen, you know, I'm pretty, you know, organized when it comes to that. But now I feel, oh no, I'm invested. Reminds me a little bit of 2016 when I was like, a woman's gonna win, right? Like I'm really happy about, you know, where we're headed right now.
Because also representation matters, right? So many folks see themselves for the first time in a candidate that they haven't been able to see themselves in Donald Trump or even Joe Biden, right? Like she's a woman, she's black, she's brown, comes from an immigrant background, right? You see yourself and you see your story in her in a way that you can't see it in Joe Biden, not because he doesn't care about those things, but that's not who he is. And so that's just getting people excited just on that alone.
There's representation, and it's important, but it's not a destination. There's a lot else to be accomplished as well.
Right.
Hae-Lin, you've talked about joy already, and we're barely getting started. Talk a bit about what you think has been opened up with the arrival, as it were, of the Harris-Walz campaign.
I think what has opened up is the energy that everybody is feeling right after the announcement has really, as Candis said, sort of giving new hope and excitement to a lot of our members. Also, I will say most of our members didn't know who Tim Walz is, and I think he really brings a different energy, but also he's so clear. He has such a unique gift in talking about issues that matters to working families in a way that says, okay, call me a radical. I just don't want kids to go to school hungry.
Right.
That everybody gets, and I think that especially for folks who feel like, you know, this economic message is important, he brought new energy. But I think, you know, VP Harris has just shown up in a way that creates so much excitement. And I think, you know, this energy is important. Obviously, energy won't win you the votes. But I think, as we all said, it makes you motivated to just do so much more. And I think if the overall environment is such that, you know, the numbers are down, the headlines are bad, you know, there's not enough support, it makes a big difference when you now just hear the polling numbers go up, the support is going up. The DNC was just all day, every day, you saw everybody's coming out, and to the point that representation matters. I've never heard members reach out to say, I want to go to Pennsylvania right away. I want to bring my family. I want to bring my children. My children have the unique opportunity to help get the first woman president, the first black woman president get elected. It's an immense gift that we can give to our children, and it's really something I've never heard before. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years.
Black and South Asian.
Yeah.
Tim Walz came to public attention in part because of his use of the word weird, his naming of the GOP candidates, at least at the top of the party, as weird. He says he wasn't referring to all the voters. But what do you think about that word, weird? I've been kind of ambivalent about it because I'm kind of pro-weird, but I do get what he was getting at.
I mean, I think, you know, for me and, you know, as a black woman, we do use weird in the way that he was using it about Trump and Vance, right? Because it's just very weird. I can't even think of another way to say it. They're weird, right? It's like not the folks that you want to spend a lot of time around or, you know, leave, you know, your folks with, right? Like, I don't want to be around them. They're weird. And it's not like different or, you know, quirky. It's like some weird stuff going on over there. And so,
Trump Vance weird?
You know, I don't ever really use the word. I don't use the word often. My daughter says it to me. She goes, that's just weird. And I'm like, what? Like, what's odd about it, right? Like, I don't use it often, but I do see there's a very, like, moment in time use of the word, particularly, all the social media aspects or kids who don't, I see my daughter using it all the time. Right. I found it fascinating that he used it because of his age, right? Because of, I'm called old and I'm not at 50 yet, right? So I think it's energizing an entirely new generation. At this point in my life, I love it. I wanna make sure that we have a new groundswell of young people, and now more than ever, unions are enjoying this, a great messaging. That you say union to a bunch of young folks, they kind of know already. Yeah. And it's a good definition. Yeah. It is not, we're not talking about the 80s, the way in which unions were being sideswiped by messaging. I mean, we're not doing that. As what we're doing now, we're seeing folks talking about, respect, dignity in the workplace, talking about being a worker and that's not who you are, that's what you do. Yeah. And so I'm finding it really amazing to be at this moment in time, seeing the next generation starting to feel like there is a space for them. And I think that's great.
All right, well, we're going to come back to this conversation. I hate to take you back to the RNC, but that's where we're going to go. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, this summer hosted the 2024 Republican National Convention. And of course, not all the action occurred within the convention hall. Outside the security fence surrounding the convention, a sizable contingent of protesters gathered each day, advocating for the rights of immigrants, women, people of color, LGBTQ rights, and others. Many came to protest and march for labor rights. Here's a little bit of what that looked like.
Right up the street from where we're standing, some of our identities and communities were being attacked. Not here, not in Milwaukee, and not in November.
We know that what they're doing endangers safety regulations, gutting OSHA, changing the National Labor Relations Board to be headed by an anti-union lawyer who was trying to change case law to destabilize unions. We have 4 years of Trump experience, and we can only assume that if reelected, he would take that platform and push everything to the nth degree.
I found that it was a disgusting evening last night where Donald Trump criticized all of the people here in Milwaukee. When he talked about a democratically elected labor leader in Sean Fain, he said that he wanted to fire him. That's not democracy.
This really is democracy at stake.
How is everyone feeling after that?
Locke has a really good relationship with labor. I myself come out of labor and student organizing and worked for SEIU. And so we've been able to always kind of maintain those really great relationships. We win these elections by folks being able to educate folks.
Thanks for being here.
If we stand together and remember all the different freedoms that we're fighting for, I do think that we'll pull it off in November.
And we want to grow. If you want to unionize your workplace, reach out to us. We have resources. We can help you.
We chant, like, get up, get down. Milwaukee is a union town, and that's very true. My father works for Harley-Davidson. Wait, let me look at the keychain. It's a little keychain. He works as a machinist over there. My family has a robust history working in factories and unions. We need to stand up for labor rights for these workers. Funny thing growing up, like, I would always have, like, Harley gear. And there's a picture of me from like the 120th anniversary. I'm like 2 years old in like leather and stuff. Like I would be growing up, coming home. My dad was asleep because he was gonna go to work at like 3 a.m. He was gonna go to the factory, the third shift. That culture, I'm so used to it, and I didn't realize like how different of a household I grew up in because of that until I like started talking to people like, oh, so not everyone's, dad like has the uniform and like comes home a little greasy sometimes, and like mandatory overtime, has to go on strike sometimes. My grandmother, she came up from Mississippi and just got right to work. So it's like my whole family on my dad's side, it's so much factory, working class history here that I've been great to like tap into for sure.
Proud history of the labor movement here in Milwaukee. And not too long ago, we commemorated the Bayview Massacre when people were marching to defend and to advocate for the 8-hour workday. And they were massacred for that by police agents of the state as private security forces. May Day, the big May Day strike, which is led by Voces de la Frontera, and the Students for Democratic Society participated in that.
In Wisconsin, we are a dairy state ran by immigrants, and with the name calling and the stereotypes of immigrants, and not recognizing that without immigrants in Wisconsin and in the country, we would not be running the economy. Most of the undocumented immigrants work in dairy farms. Some of them work in factories that produces our famous cheese that we have here in Wisconsin. Without the undocumented immigrants that are working in these fields, that are working in these farms, we wouldn't be producing what this state is known for.
I'm a teacher. I was very affected by Act 10 in Wisconsin, where we lost our rights to collectively bargain. Kamala Harris supports teachers, workers.
We need unions. I don't know if anybody is really paying attention to how much power they have when they're an employed person.
Very much in favor for the repeal of Act 10 here in the state of Wisconsin.
Wisconsin is the Midwestern spirit of workers, and to identify a candidate that thinks about workers, it's very important to us.
With the culture here in America, and everybody's relearning and reconnecting to each other now.
That's what really scares bigots and racists, is when they see people coming together. For whatever reason, they are fearful of that. The truth is that people only want to be connected. They only want to have strong communities in a place where their children can grow and prosper and be a part of a greater network of community. But to want homogeny, to want everything to be the same, to me, that's un-American.
So that's just a little glimpse of what was happening in Milwaukee. Many of us weren't there. We watched on television. It's a reminder of how, for all the talk, there's the reality of what Republican policy has actually meant for workers. But let's start with the Trump campaigns, the Trump-Vance campaign's effort to kind of cast themselves as pro-worker. You have Vance making that pitch, you have Josh Hawley making that pitch, and then you had the Teamster president, Sean O'Brien, showing up and making a speech that I think made a lot of people in the audience very confused. Are we for this or are we against this? But it was all framed as kind of against big business, for poor workers. Did you buy any of it, Hae-Lin?
I think the RNC was actually, especially in juxtaposition to the DNC, a perfect picture of the choice that workers have, right? And I was just thinking about how at the RNC they were holding signs saying mass deportation, and at the DNC they were holding signs saying union yes. And so I think it's a perfect picture of the choice that workers have. On the one hand, you have a union buster, a scab, let's face it. The whole DNC chanted, Trump is a scab. He crossed picket lines, he doesn't care about workers. He's a con artist, right? But I think this just shows the perfect picture that he's a con artist. He puts in his words, he puts in his actions that he's anti-worker, he's a nightmare for workers. They don't care about workers. They pass legislation that benefit the wealthy and hurt workers. There's a lot of examples of that. And so I think those actions speak much louder.
But the plan, much as we, insofar as we can understand what the Trump campaign agenda is for workers. He's talked about tariffs as a way to, I guess, bring down prices, even though he thinks it will bring up prices, to increase local manufacturing here in the U.S., to penalize imports. He's talked about no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and he's going to take over the Federal Reserve and be able to control inflation that way. I think that's more or less his plan.
This gave me anxiety.
Sorry.
Take over the Federal Reserve. I'm like, Look, we know what we saw in 2016 to 2020, right? A rollback of basic fundamental worker rights. We saw the way in which the NLRB, of which appointments are made by the president to run our National Labor Relations Board, rolled back so many gains that had been made during the Obama administration. And then we saw what Biden did and his administration did, and even just going as the most basic level of the Department of Labor, their proactive way that they're going out and saying, you have a right to organize, getting our federal government, we have attacks coming from all angles, having a Trump administration, having another opportunity for them to be in control to make decisions that will negatively impact the opportunity for workers to organize that would be catastrophic. Not for the organized labor movement, for the everyday working person who will not be able to stand up and speak for themselves.
Are any of your members, Candis, 32BJ, property workers, are any of them buying this no tax on tips promise?
Oh, I don't think they are. I think,
I'd like to get rid of the tip wage altogether, but it sounds attractive, no tax on tips.
I think they say a lot of things and then they don't actually back it up. And our members, and part of the work for labor is to actually educate our members on not just listening to what they say when they're campaigning, but look at what they've done, right? When we have examples, right? Trump was the president for 4 years, and Lucia started to talk about that. What he did while he was president was bad for workers. And particularly for our workers, when we think about the fact that almost 2/3 of our members are immigrants. Whether they're TPS holders or they've gotten some documentation, and some are undocumented. Trump and what they're saying about working people, especially immigrant working people, is horrible, right? The proof is in the pudding, right? They'll say one thing and they'll do another, and that's the work we have to do for labor. Because even when you see folks at the RNC that say they're representing labor, what are they talking about, right? What are the issues that they're raising, right? Labor does not look the same. All labor are not white male construction workers, right? There are black, exactly.
Building trades.
There are black security officers. There are brown airport workers, right? There are all types of workers who actually come together as organized labor that need to be represented in what folks are saying.
Do we have to give the RNC credit that apparently what happened was Sean O'Brien went to both conventions and offered to speak, and they were the ones that said yes?
No. This is my answer, no, right? Because even when you look at the response to when he talked about going after big business, that crowd was silent.
Yeah.
There wasn't.
And they were leaving the convention hall. That wasn't
There
packed.
weren't, the cheers that we as labor want to see from elected leaders and
totally
delegates when
confused.
you talk about going after big business, because going after big business means you're fighting for working people.
And big business was in that room, or if they weren't in the room, they were in the back rooms having given the contributions.
And we saw labor speak at the DNC.
We did.
Wasn't Sean O'Brien, but was Sean O'Brien the person to speak on behalf of the entire labor movement? No. We saw diverse faces. We saw diverse labor unions speak at the DNC. They took turns. We saw them up. And not only that, we saw them in the crowd. The delegates themselves were many union members that were out there.
Well, that was a great example. I mean, they didn't have Sean O'Brien, but they did have Teamster members up there on the stage, and they kicked off day one with Liz Schuler from the AFL-CIO. I think there were in total 7 labor leaders that spoke. Definitely a different scenario at the DNC, but I do have to go back to, the numbers. You saw a decline. Democrats always win the majority of union voters, for sure, but you saw a big decline between Obama and Biden. I think Obama won union voters by 36% or something, and by the time I got to Biden, we were down to, 22, something like that, a real shrinkage. There are Republicans in the labor family.
For sure.
You're having a convention right now in New York.
Yes.
Talk about that.
We run the gamut. We have members from all parties, right? And our members have different perspectives. If you're a teacher, you'll have a different perspective. If you're a steel worker, you'll have a different perspective. If you're a nurse, depending on your class or your economic scale or how much you make and what you bring, back home and where you live essentially throughout the city. And if you live in a state, particularly that is a right to work state, that it's not about having a right to work, right? It's about not necessarily being able to join a union, if you so say. There's a different perspective, narratives, all these ways that you push back against being part of a union, or others that embrace it and are struggling in those states because they want to be part of a union, and it is so difficult to do so. So we run the gamut, and we try to represent all voices, not just the loudest, even if they're the smallest, right? We try to represent all voices and everyone's diverse perspective, but we're talking about a diversity that runs from all walks of life, ages, stages, right? Like,
and a lot of work getting done. I mean, the Obama victory is attributed largely to the enormous amount of popular education and public education of their members that unions did in that campaign, both first time and the second time. Hae-Lin, you want to come in again about what unions are doing in this moment and how to address this drop-off in union support for the Democrats?
Yeah, I think there is a big duty for labor unions to make sure we educate our members of the choices that they have. And the way we do it, as Lucia said, we don't do it in a partisan way, right? We say, these are the candidates, these are the issues you care about, measure them, look at them, and make your choice. I will say our members represent the American people, right? And so we have seen polarization increase over the last couple of decades. Sure. Our members are not immune by that. But what we have found is the labor movement is the only place to bring all these voices together, and members, for the most part, trust their union. And so it tells me that we have to communicate to our members more and more, because people are in the echo chambers. There's a certain group that's only inundated by certain type of news and headlines, right? And vice versa.
And not immune to that.
They don't really interact, but because they're members of a union, we bring all these people together, we can communicate to them, and they trust what we say.
And this question of your actual lives being at stake. I mean, when Lee Saunders got up there at the DNC speaking for federal workers and state workers at AFSCME, it's dire. Are people getting that? Are people getting the details of what could happen under the next Trump administration, do you think?
It's important for people to get the details of what could happen, but we also can look backward about what did happen.
Sure.
We lost a lot of members during COVID. And the response of Trump and his administration impacted our members seriously, right? Making sure members who were on the front lines, these were essential workers. Our members can't stay home, right? If a building is open, you need building service workers in that building. And our members died. A lot of them. We had hundreds of members die, right, as a result of being, of the COVID pandemic. And so we could look backward, and then we have to look forward, right? What are they doing for working people, for everyday people, and educate our members on that? And then I just want to go back a little bit to one thing you talked about. Race matters, gender matters, right? And so all of these things matter to people on top of what they do for a living, right? So sometimes people are getting different messages about what the candidates stand for on other issues that they care about. Our members are majority immigrant. Our members are also heavily Catholic, right? And so, when you think about issues of choice and other things, that may be impacting what decision they make and how they make those decisions. But then we also have to talk about the bread and butter issue. Putting food on your table, taking care of your family, which candidate is better for that? And educating people on that, I think, is going to be what makes the difference and why we've gotten so many members excited. We do have members in Pennsylvania. We have, over 20,000 members in Pennsylvania. We have one member that alone knocked more than 8,000 doors in 2020.
Amazing.
Right? Because she knows what the difference would have been had we kept Trump in office and not elected President Biden. Yeah. And so it was personal for her. So when she knocked those doors, she was talking about, this is for me and my kids and my life. And that's why I'm excited to knock doors and talk to you about what's at stake here in this election.
Well, absolutely. And shifting to the DNC for a second, a very different picture both of what it is to be an American, a very different picture of what's at stake at this moment and the possibilities that are at stake, and a huge sense of party, meaning having a party. There were there weren't a lot of details in terms of economic agenda, but we've also heard Kamala Harris and Tim Walz talk in other venues. We heard her talk in Pennsylvania, I think it was, or North Carolina, one of her economic speeches. She talked in the past about signing the PRO Act, making it easier for people to become union members. She's talked about this housing work, investment in housing that should appeal to the building trades, maybe.
Should appeal to everyone. Considering we have a shortage of housing.
No kidding.
In every state that I could, yes.
No
it was
kidding.
just in California. They talked to me about the shortage in housing stock. Forget about it. New York City, we're having a conversation at the city level about how to increase housing. So we wish all housing was built union.
Yeah.
And in this case, the building trades. But that is not so. We've seen tons of jobs go non-union, being built, and not necessarily being built affordable for everyday workers.
Are people, is she getting the benefit of what the Biden-Harris administration did on that front? Because they did put into the CHIPS Act and they did put into the Infrastructure Act. The
infrastructure bill was huge, right, to develop our bridges and our tunnels, and we see new, ways of transportation coming up, and the investment that there is in electrical buses, right, and new ways of building better, right, in all communities.
And prioritizing unions in all of that.
And I think that's going to be their job right now, and our job, right, to kind of hone in on what this administration has done for unions. If you're only fanning the flames of the fear of, migrants are coming and, the economy and the inflation, everything rising, the reality is these companies are taking upon themselves, and every time you go to a supermarket, they're, hiking the prices. It benefits them as corporations, and we're somehow blaming the government. But I'm not saying that there isn't an element of the way in which we manage our government and our Federal Reserve and the way in which we manage interest rates that are impacting everyday people. But we know for a fact that these corporations will benefit the most out of an administration that sees them as allies and friends. The current administration sees unions, workers, and everyday Americans as allies and friends. And that's who we need to be worried about.
One of the issues that's come up in the in the weeks immediately following Harris becoming the candidate was pressure coming from large donors, especially for Harris to let go of Lina Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, who's been doing such important work around fighting monopolies, whether it's Google and the communications technologies, or even the potential merger between two huge grocery chains, Kroger's and Albertsons. Do you think that's over? Are we going to keep Lina Khan? You got a sense of how committed this administration would be, a Harris-Khan administration would be, to maintaining this focus on beating monopolies?
We have no doubt that future President Harris will continue the policies and the path that they both, President Biden and Harris, laid together. And that's one thing that we feel very, very strongly about. Again, President Biden, most pro-union president of any of our lifetime. We've seen the most, not only in legislation that has been passed, but also first president ever to walk a picket line.
Correct.
This is major. And so we always say, we as labor, we always know we have to fight, right? But we have a seat at the table. In the Biden administration and in the future Harris administration, we're going to be on the menu in the Trump administration, right? And so we have no doubt about it. And we feel very optimistic. Look, when Vice President Harris released the first glimpses of an economic agenda, we saw housing, taxes, prices. These are all things that everyday Americans care about. And so we feel very optimistic. We have no doubt about it.
And healthcare? There were some on the left who were worried that she abandoned her commitment to Medicare for all.
I think that this is our best shot. And I do think that labor has the seat at the table. I think Hae-Lin's point is super important. When you look at the DNC and you look at who was there, our president of the Service Employees International Union was there and spoke and has a seat at the table in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And so, labor was in the House, and we're going to stay in the House, and we're going to make our voices heard. Even the slogan that she uses, VP Harris, when we fight, we win, that's a labor slogan, right? Oh, because we know we have to fight and we have to win. And the fact that she's even adopted that as part of her campaign shows the impact that labor is having on her campaign, but also the impact that labor had on that administration, the Biden-Harris administration. And we expect to keep that impact and to continue to talk to them and encourage them to keep moving in the direction that they were moving in.
It was a pretty big contrast between Hulk Hogan ripping off his T-shirt and Sean Fain ripping off his T-shirt and quoting Nelly in the course of it. Here's a little cut of Sean Fain, just cause.
For the UAW and for working class people everywhere, this election comes down to one question. Which side are you on? On one side, we have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who have stood shoulder to shoulder with the working class. On the other side, we have Trump and Vance. Two lapdogs for the billionaire class who only serve themselves. In the words of the great American poet, Nellie, it's getting hot in here.
That was UAW President Shawn Fain speaking at the Democratic Convention. We're going to take a short break. You are watching CityWorks.
The CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies is the 25th and newest school under the CUNY umbrella. Dedicated to public service and social justice, the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies offers undergraduate and graduate degrees in the areas of labor studies and urban studies, and certificate programs in labor relations, public administration and public policy, healthcare policy and administration, and community leadership. We pride ourselves on being an institution that brings together activists and academics. Find out more at slu.cuny.edu.
We're talking to Candis Tall, Hae-Lin Choi, and Lucia Gomez about the upcoming elections and all that is at stake for working people and the labor movement. It wasn't just workplace issues that came up during the convention or in discussions in the weeks since the launch of the Harris-Walz campaign. When it comes to labor and working people, there's a lot else on people's minds. And we saw some of that at the Democratic Convention as people were, in my view, rightly frustrated with the exclusion of even one Palestinian-American voice from the platform. And there were people protesting outside. Here's a glimpse of some of the protests that were happening in Chicago.
For the last week, we've seen thousands of demonstrators stream into this park, all demanding an arms embargo on Israel and a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire in Palestine.
Palestine is a labor issue because we should care about humans no matter what part of the world they live in. And what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank now is a crisis, a humanitarian crisis. It's a genocide that our tax dollars are paying for. And so there's money to destroy, to maim, to murder children, women, men in Gaza and the West Bank, and yet we don't have money for healthcare. We don't have money for housing, transportation, all the things that people in this city deserve and work very hard for.
I was on strike last year. I've been to many picket lines. Workers stand in solidarity with other workers around the world, and we're just here to show our support for the Palestinian trade unionists and also the people of Palestine in their right to self-determination. Today, the uncommitted delegates are demanding to have a Palestinian voice in the DNC, in the convention, and they were denied. So they're doing a sit-in. One of my friends who's a delegate is also there, participating. And I wish they would have not just mentioned a ceasefire, but also, ending the aid to Israel, ending the no more bombs, no more weapons, no more money to fund this war.
So that's just a sense, again, of what was happening outside of the Democratic Convention. We've talked about the euphoria inside and the joy inside and the careful programming. That programming didn't allow for a whole lot of dissent, and people that were there protesting as uncommitted delegates felt not only excluded, but pretty much shut off from the cameras and being able to express themselves. How do you hold that with your enthusiasm for Harris-Walz at this moment?
Oh, I know it's going to be worse than the Trump, right? More reactive, and definitely not one that's going to take into account the fact that we need a ceasefire in Palestine, right? We need there to be real conversation, real discussion, real resolution of the needs on both sides of what is taking place right now. I cannot pretend to know all the details or to be invested in one side or the other, but I am invested in the fact that human lives are, just being treated as if, they're like the inhumanity that's taking place. And we know within the labor movement that there are strong opinions on both sides. And then there's a lot of individuals that are kind of just know that it's inhumane what is taking place and that we need an immediate ceasefire so there can be a real conversation to some kind of adequate resolution.
I mean, a lot of unions have called for it, SEIU being one,
absolutely.
UAW, others.
CWA as well.
But an adequate resolution will not come with the Trump administration. We know that. I mean, we do believe that a Harris administration will have a real conversation about what takes place. And I think Harris said that in her speech, you know.
And I mean, as labor, we're always going to protect the right to protest, right? Dissent is patriotic. And I think all of the protests and what we've seen outside is going to further the conversation, because we do need a resolution and we need it now, right? And the only way we're going to do that is to keep speaking up and speaking out and calling those folks who have the power to create some change over there to really focus on this and do it now. It has to happen now.
I don't think there's ever been a DNC where there wasn't protest, and we need to be able to have these conversations. And I think it was said that, you know, the party is a big family, and in family there's disagreements, but I think what is important and special, what we have to protect at all costs, is having these conversations, right? And being able to say, we might not disagree, but let's talk about it. There's ways to do it. And so I absolutely agree that I can absolutely hold these two things, the excitement about the presidency, the candidacy, the promise that it holds, while at the same time saying, we don't agree on everything. We'll talk about it, we'll figure it out. We might protest because voices need to be heard, but those things, I can absolutely hold those.
Independent Senator Bernie Sanders spoke at the Democratic Convention, and he kind of pushed the agenda too. He's somebody who used his platform very much to say, okay, this is what we actually want now, but we actually want other things as soon as you're all elected, as soon as we're all elected. And he went so far as to remind everyone that we need to keep doing the work, especially after Election Day, especially when it comes to labor. Union membership, 1 in 10 U.S. workers, union members. There's a lot of work to be done, just growing the strength of the movement. Tell me a bit about your next few weeks before the election, and then what follows. How does the House of Labor grow?
We are gearing up to do everything we can in this election to win, and then the work continues. We know as labor we can't stop the work once folks are elected. We have to push them to continue to win for working people, right? We want to say congratulations, you know, on day one, maybe give them the day two, day three, we're back. And we have an agenda for working people, and we want to see that agenda realized.
I'm going to throw this to you, Hae-Lin, but what do we do if Donald Trump wins?
Oh,
we have no choice but to fight. We have no choice but to fight. And I mean, we're labor. We never give up. We never give up. That's not a luxury that any of us have.
To people that might be watching right now, wondering how to plug in or what they could maybe do, or if they're not union members, what they can do.
They should call the New York City Central Labor Council. I welcome any chance that I get to speak to someone from the general public asking me questions about how to form a union, or particularly, we want to be supportive, we want to help workers, we want to win. And so we're more than happy to take anyone to come to Pennsylvania, come to upstate, right, to help us win not only the presidency, but the House and various Senate and legislative.
Are there particular races you're watching, you're worried about? Because it's important that you remind us that this
I mean, in New York City, we're looking at District 3, right? We're always paying attention to that one district that we lost in 2022, Tom Suozzi's district, but it is now Congressman Suozzi. We're going to be working actively in that seat, making sure that we're able to protect that seat. There are districts upstate, that Battleground New York, and I'm happy to pivot to those particular districts that we are willing and ready to participate and help.
Yeah, I mean, local politics gets especially important if a Trump presidency is in place.
Absolutely. And, you know, as Lucia said, we want to make sure that future President Harris has functioning majorities, right? It's important. We cannot pass any legislation unless we flip the House, keep the Senate. And so, as we started talking about earlier, for us, it's crucially important to take back the House. We have been focusing on that since last year. So 32BJ, CWA, a number of other unions, but also community organizations, Planned Parenthood, Indivisible, the Working Families Party.
We have the Equal Rights Amendment on the ballot.
Yeah. And
so they got to flip the ballot and vote yes on the Equal Rights Amendment. So that's crucial. Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand is on the ballot as the U.S. Senator, right? So we can't have any slowdowns.
We haven't talked about climate. Climate issues are on the ballots in many places too.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, for New York City folks, Long Island is right, you know, right there. You know, go up to Hudson Valley, go a little north, and let's do the work there, because the path to Congress is going to go through Long Island and it's going to go through upstate New York. And so maybe you can't get on a bus and go all the way to Pennsylvania, but you could get on the Long Island Railroad and head out to, Nassau County and Suffolk County and knock some doors there and talk to voters about the importance of this election and winning back the House.
Yeah.
We actually have spent an entire program without talking about reproductive rights, which is astonishing because it's such a central issue in this election. Is that because you think it's not so central to your members, or I just didn't bring it up?
It's absolutely central.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we talked a lot about how these elections are personal to our members, right? And so our members are union members, but they're women, they're people of color, so they care about a lot of things. And I think it's so clear that a lot of our members say what's at stake in this election is, for me as a woman and for my children, they might not have rights over their bodies. For me as a person of color, as a person with immigration status, all kinds of protection and rights are, so all these things are on the line and they all matter, and that's why we say everything is at stake in this election. For labor, we obviously care about workers' rights and labor rights, but we care about our members as people.
Yeah. I mean, there was this crazy divide happened in the midterm where people said, is it going to be abortion issues? Is it going to be reproductive issues? Or is it going to be economic issues? And I'm like, that's an economic issue.
Correct.
Have we got over that split, do you think?
I hope so.
I also think this is
right, because
analysts talking.
Yeah,
this
is not everyday people.
People don't think like
and they
that.
don't think like that, and they're not choosing one versus the other.
Exactly.
They're choosing it all, and they're saying, having, choosing to have, children or not is definitely an economic justice issue.
Speaking as someone who just had one.
Listen, every time I pay for daycare, I'm reminded that this is an economic justice
I'm about
issue.
to pay for college, and it is absolutely
economic
top of
It matters. It matters to
And
to
as a
everyone.
lesbian, I'm very happy not to have been forced to have children if I didn't want to have them. So there we go. We got the whole gamut
Facts.
represented.
That's right.
So where do we go from here? These are our last sort of moments in terms of the weeks between now and the election. You've given us a little bit of a sense of how active everybody's going to be. Is there one agenda item that you just really want to get done in the next administration that you're going to be talking about on the doors?
Oh, the PRO Act. I mean, just folks' right to organize and to be able to have the basic opportunity to be able to, fight for their rights in the workplace and be able to join a union. That'd be amazing. The PRO Act would be top. Aside from immigration reform, which is always my top. But, when it comes to labor, I would say the PRO Act and obviously immigration reform.
Since you took two that I would say, I want to say we have to raise wages.
Yeah.
What people are making and what they're able to bring home is really going to impact how they see government and how they see their lives and how they're thriving or not thriving. We have to lift wages, and whether that is making it easier for folks to join a union so that they can collectively bargain and lift their wages, or whether it's raising the national minimum wage, state minimum wages. We have to raise wages for workers because what they're taking home matters.
Hae-Lin, you get the last word.
All of the things have been picked. No, I would say in addition to that, taking on corporate greed. Absolutely. And look, the way I think we all think about elections and legislation is elections are a means to an end to create the space for us to move our agenda. What matters is the agenda, right? And so you heard a lot of examples of what's important to working people, and we're going to represent all of them. Economic issues, reproductive issues, climate issues, whatever issues they care about. And so I think we're very clear what matters is our agenda, but we need to be able to have the space to move our agenda. And so, just to add I absolutely agree, obviously, with the PRO Act, but I think taking on corporate greed is connected to workers not having organizing rights, workers not being paid. And I think, again, we see the clear choice of having a seat at the table to say, we need to take on corporate greed. It's gotten out of control. This is the richest country in the history of the planet, and inequality has never been so out of control. When CEOs make 800 times of what the average worker makes, this is just out of control. Right? And so in a future Harris administration, we're going to have a seat at the table to say we need to address these things. Whereas in a Trump administration, a union buster, a scab, someone who only will serve the billionaire class, it's absolutely clear we're going to be on the menu.
Money out of politics, I say. Thank you all. I appreciate so much your participation in this really rich conversation. Thank you, Candis Tall, Hae-Lin Choi, and Lucia Gomez. Wonderful speaking with you on our special Election 2024 episode. That is it for CityWorks this time. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching. Now you can take CityWorks on the go with the new CUNY TV app. Download it today, wherever you get your apps.